Imagine standing in front of your entire family, your friends, and your military brothers and sisters, the proudest moment of your life. Years of sweat, sacrifice, sleepless nights, and missed birthdays had led to this one day, your military promotion ceremony. The flags were shining, the air thick with pride, and in the center of the room stood a masterpiece, a $5,000 cake that symbolized not just celebration, but respect for the rank you had earned. Everyone was smiling, cameras flashing, and then, just like that, the moment turned into a nightmare. My sister, who had always carried a streak of jealousy and mischief, walked past the cake with an innocent grin. She brushed her hand against the table, tilted her wrist, and before anyone could stop it, the towering cake began to wobble. Gasps filled the hall. Plates clattered to the floor. And then, with one sickening crash, the cake toppled, smashing into the ground in a swirl of frosting and ruined decoration. $5,000 gone. The air froze. The pride, the joy, the hard-earned recognition, all swallowed by humiliation, but what cut deeper than the loss of money was the smirk. She wore the little curl of satisfaction in her lips as if she had been waiting for this. And suddenly, the whispers started. Was it really an accident? Some people looked at her, others looked at me. My stomach burned, my fists clenched, but I stood there, locked between rage and control. This was supposed to be my day. My day of honor. My day of triumph. And she had stolen it in front of everyone. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that her little act would set off a chain of events that would change everything between us forever. Growing up with my sister was like living with a storm that never quite passed. There were calm days, sure, moments when we laughed together over silly childhood games or shared secrets whispered in the dark before sleep. But beneath that, there was always a tension, an edge in her voice that carried the weight of competition. She was my older sister by just 2 years, but she treated those 2 years like an insurmountable advantage, something she lorded over me every chance she got. When I struggled with schoolwork, she would smirk and finish hers early, making sure to point out how much smarter she was. When I brought home an award from sports, she would find a way to mention how my success wasn't as impressive as hers. In some other area. At first, I thought it was normal sibling rivalry, the kind that fizzles out when you grow older and realize that life has more important things to offer. But with her, it wasn't something she outgrew, it was something she nurtured that as I grew older, I found direction and discipline. The military called to me in a way that nothing else had. I was never the smartest in the room, never the most gifted, but I could push harder, endure more, and that became my strength. I chose to enlist, knowing it meant sacrifices, knowing it meant trading comfort for service. To me, it was a path toward becoming someone who mattered, someone who contributed to something larger than himself. But to my sister, it was laughable. I still remember the day I told her I was joining. She laughed, actually laughed out loud, and said, "So you're going to let other people tell you what to do for the rest of your life?" Figures. She called me the obedient soldier. From that day forward, her tone dripping with mockery. Like my choice was a reflection of weakness rather than strength, I tried to ignore her. I told myself that she didn't understand, that she hadn't seen the value in sacrifice and structure. But her words clung to me, like sand caught in boots, irritating and ever-present. Whenever I came home on leave, she found new ways to needle me. If I woke up early to run, she'd groan about how I was showing off. If I stood tall, wearing the uniform that I had earned, she'd roll her eyes and mutter, "Here comes Captain America." Our parents, tired of the endless squabbles, would brush it off as sibling banter, never quite seeing the sharpness in her words or the sting they left behind. The truth was, I had always hoped that one day she would change. I carried this belief that as we both matured, she would let go of the need to compete, to belittle, and maybe we'd find common ground again. But the older we got, the worse it seemed to become. While I was grinding through long deployments and endless training, she drifted through life without purpose. Jobs came and went for her, relationships flickered like sparks, but never held. She had all the freedom in the world but no anchor, and deep down, I think that's what fueled her bitterness toward me. Where she saw chains in my discipline, I saw freedom in purpose. And maybe, in her eyes, my steady climb through the military ranks was a mirror reflecting everything she hadn't achieved. Despite everything, I kept reaching out. I invited her to milestones, included her in celebrations, hoping each time that maybe she'd surprise me, maybe she'd show pride instead of scorn. But that pride never came. At my graduation ceremony after boot camp, she showed up late, made a joke about the uniforms looking like costumes, and spent the evening scrolling through her phone. When I received my first commendation, she waved it off, saying, "It's just a piece of paper, relax." I can still remember the hollow feeling in my chest, as if every achievement I worked so hard for meant nothing when it reached her ears. Still, I couldn't cut her out. She was family, and no matter how much she wounded me with her words, some part of me wanted her approval. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need her validation, but deep inside, it did matter. It mattered because no one else knew me the way she did. She had been there through our childhood struggles, through the chaos of our parents' arguments, through the late nights when we whispered about our dreams. And maybe that's why it hurt so much, because I knew she was capable of being more than what she was, yet she chose envy every time. By the time I reached the point of being considered for promotion, I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment she couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a small step forward, it was years of sacrifice finally being recognized. It wasn't only my achievement, it was something my entire family could be proud of. I thought she'd see the significance, that this time, she wouldn't turn it into a joke. I wanted her there, not just because she was my sister, but because deep down, I believed in giving her one more chance to prove me wrong. But as I prepared for that ceremony, I carried with me the shadow of every remark, every smirk, every dismissive laugh. A small voice in my mind whispered that I was setting myself up again, that her jealousy was stronger than her love. Still, I silenced that voice, clinging to the hope that this time, she'd finally stand beside me with pride instead of contempt. The day of my promotion ceremony arrived like the culmination of a lifetime's worth of sweat and sacrifice. The morning air carried a weight of anticipation, a crispness that seemed to sharpen every detail, the shine of polished shoes, the faint rustle of flags, the muted footsteps of men and women gathering in their finest uniforms. I had stood on battlefields before, faced down fear and exhaustion, but this day carried a different kind of gravity. This was recognition, not just from the military I served, but from my family, my community, everyone who had ever doubted whether I could make it. As I straightened my uniform in the mirror before leaving, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection, the hard lines carved into my face by discipline, the steadiness in my eyes. For once, I allowed myself to feel proud, to imagine my parents' faces glowing with pride, to hear my name announced with the weight of honor it deserved. The venue had been prepared with meticulous care. Rows of chairs lined the hall, polished until they gleamed under the soft glow of the chandeliers. Flags stood tall and unwavering, their colors vibrant, commanding respect. But the centerpiece of the hall, the one that drew gasps the moment it was unveiled, was the cake. It wasn't just a cake, it was a monument. 5 tiers of white and gold icing, decorated with delicate military insignias, intricate sugar work, and edible gold dust that caught the light and shimmered like metals. The bakery had been commissioned weeks in advance, and the cost, $5,000, wasn't just about extravagance. It was a statement of respect, a way for my brothers and sisters in arms to show how much this promotion meant. Each slice would represent more than sweetness. It would symbolize victory, perseverance, and the unity of those who stood beside me through the darkest of times. Guests began to arrive one by one, their footsteps echoing across the polished floor. My commanding officers, men and women I deeply respected, shook my hand firmly, their nods heavy with approval. Fellow soldiers embraced me, clapped me on the back, and whispered words of congratulations. My parents arrived, my mother's eyes shining with tears. She tried to blink away, my father standing taller than I'd ever seen him, pride radiating from every pore. For a brief moment, it felt perfect, and then she walked I and my sister. She entered the hall as if she were strolling into a casual gathering, not the single most important day of my career. Her heels clicked against the floor, her lips painted with that familiar smirk I knew too well. She wore a sleek dress that drew eyes immediately, as though she had dressed not for my ceremony, but to command the spotlight herself. As she approached, she gave me a quick once-over, her eyes lingering on my uniform before she quirked an eyebrow. "Not bad," she muttered, as though I just passed some minor test. I forced a polite smile, though my jaw tightened. I wanted her to see the magnitude of the day, to feel the weight of it, but her eyes were already darting around the hall, taking in the decorations, the crowd, and finally, the cake. Her gaze lingered on it, and I couldn't read her expression. Was it awe? Envy? Something else? She didn't say a word about it, only chuckled under her breath as though the extravagance amused her. The ceremony began, and I stood before the audience as my achievements were read aloud. Every hardship, every sleepless night, every mission that had tested me to the breaking point was condensed into words that echoed through the hall. I watched as my parents clapped proudly, my fellow soldiers stood with respect, and even some of the sternest officers allowed faint smiles to cross their faces. Yet, in the corner of my eye, I caught her, my sister, sitting with her legs crossed, her chin propped in her hand, a look of faint boredom flickering across her face. While others saw honor, she seemed to see only inconvenience. Still, I pressed on, ignoring her. When the final words were spoken and the applause roared, I felt the swell of emotion rise in my chest. This was it, the moment I had fought for. As the crowd rose to their feet, the spotlight shifted toward the cake, a symbol waiting to be cut, shared, and remembered. Cameras came out, flashes lighting up the hall. The cake stood tall and proud, almost as if it were a soldier itself. Standing at attention, ready for its duty, and that was when it happened. As I turned to gather the ceremonial knife, I saw her rise from her chair. My sister walked casually toward the cake, weaving between guests as though she had some innocent purpose. At first, no one questioned her. She smiled, her movements graceful, calculated, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't place. She reached the table, rested her hand lightly against the edge, and leaned in as though admiring the details. Then, with the subtlest flick of her wrist, she nudged the corner of the table. The gasp that filled the room was deafening. The cake shuddered. One tear wobbled, then another. Someone cried out, a chair screeched across the floor, but it was too late. The towering monument tilted, teetered, and finally collapsed in a catastrophic crash. $5,000 of sugar and craftsmanship smashed against the ground, frosting splattering across the polished floor, gold dust smeared into ruin. Gasps turned into murmurs, murmurs into stunned silence, and in the middle of that silence stood my sister, her hand over her mouth in a performance of mock horror. "Oh my God," she exclaimed, her voice just a little too loud, a little too practiced. "I didn't mean to." But I saw it, the tiniest flicker of satisfaction in her eyes, the upward twitch of her lips. She tried to hide. The room froze. My officers stood rigid, my fellow soldiers looked at me in shock, my parents stared at the wreckage as if their hearts had been dropped with the cake itself. And me? I stood there, fists clenched, heart hammering in my chest, my jaw locked so tightly it hurt. This was supposed to be my day. My moment of honor. And in a single calculated movement, she had shattered it. The sound of the cake hitting the floor seemed to echo long after the hall had fallen silent. It wasn't just a crash, it was the shattering of pride, the tearing apart of something symbolic, something that represented years of sweat and sacrifice. I stood frozen in my spot, the ceremonial knife still in my hand, as if time itself refused to move forward. My chest felt tight, my throat closed off, and yet the humiliation was sharp, cutting through every layer of composure I had built over the years. I had been trained to keep my head under fire, to stay steady when chaos erupted, but this was different. This wasn't an enemy in front of me, it was my own blood, my sister, standing at the center of it all with an expression that was equal parts performance and satisfaction. Gasps rolled through the room like waves. Officers whispered to each other, some of them shaking their heads as they glanced at the destroyed centerpiece. A few soldiers exchanged awkward looks, unsure whether to step forward and help or stand back out of respect. My mother covered her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears, while my father's face had gone pale, his jaw set in a grim line. And in the middle of it all, my sister gave her best imitation of guilt. She hunched her shoulders, widened her eyes, and let out a dramatic Sigh. It was an accident, she said, her voice laced with false sincerity. I didn't see the table. But her eyes betrayed her. I knew her too well. That tiny spark, that gleam of triumph she couldn't completely hide, was enough to confirm what my gut already screamed: this wasn't an accident. She had planned it, maybe not down to the second, but enough to know what she was doing when she nudged that table. And the worst part was that no one could prove it. To everyone else, it was just an unfortunate mishap. To me, it was sabotage. The ceremony, though technically finished, felt ruined. The speeches had been spoken, the applause had been given. But the lingering taste was one of embarrassment. The cake was supposed to be the closing act, the celebration that tied everything together. Instead, it had become the scene of disaster. Cameras that had been raised to capture joyous moments now caught the mess on the floor. Guests shuffled uncomfortably, murmuring to each other, their eyes darting between the ruined cake and my sister. And then landing on me, as if waiting to see how I would react. I forced myself to stand tall, every muscle in my body screaming to explode, to lash out, to call her out in front of everyone. But years of discipline anchored me. I would not lose control here, not in front of my superiors, not in front of my brothers and sisters in arms. So, I swallowed the rage, buried the humiliation deep within my chest, and raised my voice just enough to cut through the awkward silence. "It's fine," I said, though my tone was tight, strained. "Accidents happen. Let's continue the evening." The words tasted like poison. They weren't for her, they were for everyone else. For the sake of my dignity, I couldn't let the night collapse completely. But inside, a storm raged. Every smirk she'd ever given me, every mocking word, every dismissive laugh, all of it came crashing back in that moment, magnified 100 times by the wreckage of the cake. She had stolen something from me, something I could never get back. After a few uncomfortable minutes, the guests began to settle. Some tried to lighten the mood, cracking small jokes or clapping me on the back as if to say, "Don't worry, it's just cake." But I knew it wasn't just cake. The ceremony ended in fragments, people filtering out earlier than expected. Conversations muted. The grand celebration I had envisioned had dissolved into whispers and forced smiles. When the hall finally emptied, I was left standing amidst the ruins of the cake, the sweet scent of frosting mixed with the bitterness in my chest. My parents stayed behind, their silence heavy, their faces reflecting the disappointment and sadness they couldn't put into words. My mother bent down, almost instinctively, and tried to gather pieces of the cake from the floor, as if salvaging. It could somehow salvage the evening. I stopped her gently, shaking my head. "Leave it," I whispered, my voice breaking. "It's done." And then there was her. My sister lingered near the doorway, her arms crossed, her lips pursed in that smug little curve I knew too well. She caught my eye and shrugged. "I said I was sorry," she muttered, her tone dripping with indifference. "It's not like it was on purpose." I wanted to scream at her, to unleash every word I had buried over the years, but the weight of exhaustion pressed down on me. What good would it do? She would only twist it, only turn it into another performance, another way to make me look like the fool. So I said nothing. I turned away, focusing on the ruined centerpiece, willing myself to calm down, but as I stood there, in that empty hall, I made a silent vow. This was the last time. The last time I would let her ruin something sacred to me. The last time I would allow her jealousy to overshadow my achievements. Family or not, blood or not, there were lines you did not cross, and she had just trampled over mine. That night, as I lay awake replaying the scene over and over, the humiliation burned hotter than ever. The image of the cake crashing, the laughter hidden in her eyes, the whispers of the guests, all of it carved itself into my memory like a scar. And though I didn't know it then, that scar would become the turning point. Because from that day forward, everything between us would change. The night after the ceremony stretched on endlessly, each hour heavy with anger that refused to fade. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the cake falling again, the look of fake horror on my sister's face, and the whispers that followed like shadows. By the next morning, the humiliation had hardened into something sharper: resolve. I had held my tongue in front of my officers and my soldiers because that was what discipline demanded, but now, with the dust settled, I couldn't let her get away with it. It wasn't about the cake anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about years of ridicule, years of her mocking my choices, years of her turning every achievement into a joke. That moment at the ceremony was just the climax of a pattern that had gone on too long, and I knew if I didn't confront it now, it would never end. I found her in the living room of my parents' house later that day, lounging on the couch with her phone in hand, scrolling casually as if nothing monumental had happened. The television hummed in the background, ignored, while she leaned back with the same careless posture she always carried. For a moment, I stood in the doorway, staring at her, wondering how the same blood could run through us and yet produce such different hearts. My chest tightened, not just with anger but with a heavy sadness. I had wanted her to be proud of me. I had wanted her to stand beside me, to smile genuinely and say, "You did it." But instead, she had chosen to humiliate me in front of everyone. "Why did you do it?" I asked finally, my voice low but firm. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Do what?" she replied, feigning ignorance. I stepped further into the room, my fists clenching at my sides. "The cake. You knocked it over on purpose." At that, she glanced up, her eyes gleaming with a spark of challenge. "Oh, come on," she said, rolling her eyes. "It was an accident." "You're seriously still crying about a cake? Do you even hear how ridiculous you sound?" Her dismissal was like fuel thrown onto fire. I took a breath, fighting to keep my voice steady. It wasn't just a cake. It was the centerpiece of my promotion ceremony. That moment was supposed to mean something, not just to me, but to everyone there. "And you ruined it." She laughed. Then, an airy, dismissive laugh that cut me deeper than any insult. "You're so dramatic," she said, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. "Nobody cares about some overpriced dessert. Everyone was there to see you get promoted, and guess what? You still got promoted. The world didn't end." I stared at her, stunned not by her words, but by the sheer indifference in them. She truly didn't understand, or maybe she understood perfectly but chose to twist the knife anyway. "You don't get it," I said quietly. "You've never gotten it. Every step I've taken, every achievement I've earned, you've mocked. You've treated my discipline like weakness, my sacrifices like jokes. And last night, you crossed a line. You didn't just make fun of me, you humiliated me in front of everyone I serve with, everyone I respect. That wasn't just disrespectful, it was cruel." Her smirk faltered for just a moment, but then she leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you're so special because you wear a uniform and follow orders. You strut around like you're better than everyone else because you've got medals pinned to your chest. But at the end of the day, you're just playing soldier. And maybe it's about time someone knocked you down a peg." Those words hit me harder than the ruined cake ever could. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The weight of her resentment, her jealousy, was laid bare. This wasn't about me knocking over her toys as a kid or winning an award she didn't get, this was about her own emptiness, her own lack of direction, projected onto me like poison. I finally found my voice, though it was steadier than I expected. "You didn't knock me down a peg," I said. "You only showed me who you really are." The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback ready on her lips. She just stared at me, her jaw tight, her phone forgotten in her lap. And in that silence, I realized something important. I had been giving her power all these years. Every time she mocked me, every time she dismissed me, I let it cut deeper than it should. But now, standing there, I saw her clearly, not as some rival I had to win over, not as a sister whose approval I needed, but as a person so consumed by her own bitterness that she couldn't celebrate anyone else's success. I turned toward the door, my decision already made. "This is the last time," I told her without looking back. "The last time I let you take something from me. You're my sister, but family doesn't give you the right to tear me down. From now on, if you can't respect me, you won't be part of my life." And with that, I walked away, leaving her sitting in silence. That confrontation didn't give me the closure I had hoped for. It wasn't as if she broke down in tears or apologized. Instead, it gave me something else: clarity. For the first time, I understood that no amount of hope or patience would change her. She had chosen her path, and I had to choose mine. And mine no longer included letting her sabotage the moments I had fought for with blood, sweat, and sacrifice. In the weeks that followed, I carried the weight of that confrontation with me like a stone in my chest. It was strange how quiet everything felt afterward. For years, my sister's voice had been a constant background noise in my life, mocking, dismissing, cutting me down in subtle ways that dug deeper than anyone else's words ever could. Now, after I walked out of that room and drew my line in the sand, I found myself surrounded not by her noise, but by silence. And in that silence, I began to heal. At first, it was hard. My parents tiptoed around the subject, my mother trying to defend her by saying, "She didn't mean it," or "She just doesn't understand what the military means to you." But I didn't engage. I'd spent too many years giving her excuses, forgiving her for behavior she never once tried to change. For the first time, I put myself first. It wasn't easy cutting off someone who shared my blood. Every instinct told me that family was family, no matter what, that you had to hold on because you only get one. But I realized family isn't about blood, it's about respect. It's about support. And if someone, even your own sister, refuses to give you that, then all the blood in the world doesn't change the truth. They don't belong in your life. That realization came with a strange kind of freedom. I stopped waiting for her approval. I stopped hoping she would finally clap for me, finally say, "I'm proud of you." The truth was, she wasn't capable of it. And the moment I accepted that, I felt lighter. Damn, my military life moved forward. Another deployment, another promotion on the horizon, and with each achievement, I made sure to surround myself with people who celebrated with me instead of tearing me down. My brothers and sisters in uniform had always been there, standing beside me, understanding sacrifices my own sister never cared to acknowledge. With them, there was no mockery, no envy, only pride in each other's successes, because we knew every victory came at a cost. That camaraderie filled the void she had left behind. Months later, another event came, a speaking engagement at a veterans ceremony where I was to address younger recruits about perseverance and honor. When the invitations were being sent, my parents asked if I would include her this time. My answer was calm, steady, without hesitation. No. My mother frowned, my father sighed, but neither pushed further. They saw it in my eyes. I wasn't being petty, I wasn't being cruel. I was simply done. That night, as I stood on the stage speaking about the meaning of service, about what it takes to push through pain and doubt, I felt a peace I hadn't expected. For once, I wasn't worried about her mocking me from the back row, wasn't bracing for the smirk, the jab, the sabotage. For once, my moment was truly mine. Of course, she didn't take her exclusion quietly. When she found out she hadn't been invited, she called me in a fury, her voice sharp and venomous through the phone. She accused me of being selfish, of holding grudges, of being the kind of brother who abandoned family over something as stupid as a cake. I listened for a moment, letting her words spill out, each one dripping with the same bitterness I'd known my whole life. Then, when she finally paused to breathe, I spoke with a clarity I hadn't felt before. "It was never about the cake," I said. "It's about respect. You don't respect me, and I don't need that kind of poison in my life anymore." She went silent then, and for a brief moment, I thought she might finally understand. But instead, she scoffed, muttered something under her breath, and hung up. And just like that, it was over. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. What I felt was finality. The door had closed, and I knew it wouldn't open again. There was no grand reconciliation, no last-minute apology, no tearful hug where everything was made right. Life doesn't always give you that. Sometimes, the ending is quiet, just a choice, a boundary drawn, and a step forward without them. As the years passed, I rose through the ranks, carrying the lessons of discipline and sacrifice, but also the lesson my sister had unknowingly taught me, that not everyone deserves a place in your victories. Some people, no matter how close they are by blood, will never celebrate you, only resent you. And the greatest act of strength isn't letting their bitterness infect you, it's choosing to walk away and protect your peace. On the anniversary of my promotion, I looked back at the memory of that ruined cake, that smirk on her face, and for the first time, I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel humiliation. I felt gratitude. Because in trying to ruin my moment, she gave me clarity I had needed all along. She showed me the truth about who she was, and in doing so, she set me free. And so the story ends not with revenge, not with reconciliation, but with resolve. I moved forward, stronger than before, my head held high, my life unshaken by her absence. Because at the end of the day, honor isn't about who claps for you, it's about standing tall even when they don't. And I would keep standing tall. No matter what. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to The Silent Revenge for more powerful tales.